Okay, we're here in lesson 09 begin, and what we're going to do now is take a look at a few other tools over here to try to add a little more character, a little more variety to our fur. Now, we're by no means even close to being done. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm giving you kind of an overview of what the process is. I would definitely spend a lot more time still working with the pose, the orient, the bend, as well as the length and elevation brushes before I even come to this point here. And as I, again, mentioned earlier, probably between lessons, not necessarily right now, but pretty soon, I'll come back in and do a little bit more work with a few of these tools. But what I want to look at right now is, again, adding more character. And we started doing that with our noise brush over here. Now, we kind of just used it as is. However, if we select it here, you'll notice that we do have a variety of different options to kind of play with over here. We can control very specifically where that noise goes. And what I mean specifically is not just where we're painting it, but how it applies along the length of each hair. You can see we can affect the noise on the middle, the tip. We can affect it even along the width. Now that's a little tougher to see here in the viewport, but that basically tells us that at render time, certain hairs are going to be thicker, certain hairs will be thinner, and they can even be thicker or thinner along their own length. We can also control their offset, control their twist, and kind of how they also spin around their own normal. Now, you'll notice over here we can also work with masks. Every brush has had this, we just haven't really talked about it yet. You can see pose, length, all have them. So the way masking works is pretty simple. You select mask over here, and we can go in and paint a mask. Now you're going to start seeing this green color. It can be a little tough to see on these cards. It can be a tiny bit easier on the lines. So you can see we're starting to get that bright green color in there. Okay. And what happens now is if we grab a brush, let's say again our noise brush over here, notice that it can apply within the mask or only in areas outside the mask. So we're on apply within, you could see that, oops, let me actually make that a little more effective. We'll go ahead and crank these up here. So you can see it's only affecting the fur where it's masked. Just undoing that a bit there. And with apply outside, again, we only affect the areas that are outside. That can be pretty useful, and I will use it kind of off and on. Once you're done with the mask, you don't want it anymore, there is a clear button right over here. You just tap that and your mask will be cleared away. Okay, so as I mentioned, we do have a lot of control here. So let's say that I really want this fur here to begin kind of splaying apart a bit more. What I can do is, let's say, take this tip noise and really crank that up. Keep the middle maybe a bit lower. And you can see I can now start to really kind of split those hairs around without necessarily changing their direction. Now, that's probably a bit too strong. We can see we have quite a bit of separation in there. Let's go ahead and undo that. And we'll bring both of these down just a bit. There we go. I don't want to offset them too much, but bring that down. Twisting, I do want a bit more of. Just literally kind of rotating the hairs, and there we go. That's starting to look a bit more interesting. Give myself a slightly larger brush. And I'm just going to run across this arm and just make it a little bit more wild looking. And don't worry if you go a little too far with it, and even if you've gone too far, and undo is not going to help you. We can always use our smooth brush to kind of take this all back down a bit. Sorry if you kind of see me panning and then zooming and then panning again. For whatever reason, I'm using a different Wacom tablet than normal, and the buttons are reversed on it. There we go. That looks pretty good. Again, a little bit more variety in there. Okay. So there are yet other ways, though, to continue adding variety to our fur. And some of those brushes are going to be our attraction, repulsion, and part brushes. Actually, it's the repel. It's called the repulsion brush. So attraction brush works two different ways. It can work lock style or float style. In lock style, let me go ahead and place that has a little bit longer fur. Come up here. You can see it kind of almost acts as a pinch in one area and kind of creates this clump. And then we can go over here and clump right there, clump over here. If I undo those and try to drag when I do it, you can see it all keeps going back to that center clump. So wherever you click first, that's where all the fur is going to attract to. So the way you would kind of use this is, again, to create little kind of clumps, little kind of just chunks of fur. I would probably go with a smaller brush, and then you can see you can kind of create that little clump in there, maybe then come in here, create another little clump, come in here, another clump, another clump, another clump, and then you could come in and use your smooth to kind of blend those back out a little bit more, and you start to get these kind of little clumpy areas. You can always come back in with a touch of noise just to kind of mess them back up a little more. I think that's not quite what I want. I'm going to go ahead and smooth those out just a bit. I don't mind if there's a little bit of that clumping left. It'll just make the final result more interesting. But that was a bit too much for me. So that's using the attraction brush as a lock. As a float, you can see it kind of just will clump wherever the brush currently is. This is great for creating areas where fur clumps together kind of in a straight line, like down the center of the stomach on certain animals, on people too in some cases. You can see how you can create that kind of an effect. Now this brush is pretty high in magnitude now. It's at about 0.9. So you could always bring it down and have a less pronounced of an effect. And I will probably want this kind of an effect down the center of his chest here. I just think I need the fur to be a tiny bit longer. I'm not really huge on how it looks now. And I have a feeling if I were to do this now and then lengthen it, it's going to look weird. I'd have to redo it again later. So let's now take a look at these other brushes. They might seem similar even by their pictures here, but they work a little bit differently. Let's look at the Repel brush first. Now let's go here where we kind of have a little more fur. So at first you're not going to see a whole lot of effect. It looks like it kind of just pushes the fur out from the center a little bit. That's because the magnitude is pretty low. We can go ahead and crank that up and you'll see the effect a little bit more pronounced. And you can see it actually, even though it's called the Repel, to me I kind of call it almost the blow dryer. You can see it kind of just almost introduces air into the fur and kind of just adds almost another kind of noise, but it's not really adding noise along the hair. It's just adjusting its rotation from the base. And this is, again, great for adding a lot of variety to the fur, especially in these areas here where I might want it to kind of, again, splay out a bit more. The hair that I'm going for on the arms here is supposed to be a lot longer. And I kind of want it to at least have a bit of a clumped appearance. Things are getting a little weird in there. Looks like I might have to recomb that. Just going to grab my pose brush and see if I can just kind of fix that there, grab a bit of the smooth brush, and it's looking a little better, and we can actually come right back to our Repel, and there we go. Again, I'll probably come back with more noise, brushes, and things like that later. So that's our Repel brush. So that's nice for areas we may need the fur to kind of separate out a bit more. It's not really working great right now with those weird clumps I'd made earlier. I think this is going to have to be smoothed over quite a bit, and ultimately I may have to just come in here and repose this or recomb this a bit. Let's just bring that back down a bit. Come back with a bit of elevation. Yeah, that's kind of got almost this weird arcing shape to it. I'm probably going to have to do a lot more smoothing to kind of blend that out there. Okay, and we do have one more brush, though, I want to take a look at here, and that's the part brush. This is less kind of like a blow dryer effect and more like an actual part in the fur. You can see it actually creates a slightly harder line. Again, magnitude is pretty low by default, but it actually, it has quite an effect just as is. You can see that the part, you can just go over it a few times, it becomes pretty visible. Go ahead and up that effect, and you can see it's quite a bit stronger now. Okay, so those kind of are all of our primary grooming tools, and there really are more than enough to get a really nice, looking for a word here, really nice appearance for our fur. It gives us a lot of variety, a lot of control. So I'm probably going to go ahead and end this lesson here. Now it's important to keep in mind that everything we've done so far are controlling these guide hairs. Now these guide hairs all represent a whole large number of actual primitives. Now we also have the ability to control those primitives. So I'm not sure if we'll do this in the next lesson or not, but soon we're going to go ahead and jump into actually setting up those primitives and ultimately adding something called modifiers they're going to, excuse me, allow us to actually adjust those primitives, well, I guess at the primitive level. So not necessarily having to clump these guys, but things like primitives can be cut and clumped or have noise added to them on their own. Anyway, we'll go ahead and cover that pretty soon. I'll see you guys in the next lesson.